the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Scientist podcast from Bitesize Bio. If you want to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist, you are in the right place. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, and with me, it's the driving force of this podcast, Mr. Kenneth Vogt. I've worked with Kenneth for over 7 years now, with him as my business mentor and colleague, and I knew that his expertise could help a lot of researchers, which is why we are both here today doing this podcast for you. In these sessions, we'll hear mostly from Ken on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. Along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist and from working with Ken. Today, we will be talking about the challenge in differentiating between science and scientific opinion, a topic that I think is very important. If you find this episode useful, you might want to go back and look at episodes 1 to 9 of the podcast, in which we talk about the foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which we'll be referring to in this and all future episodes. So let's go and bring in the man himself. Kenneth, how are you today?
Doing great, Nick. How are you? You know, it's interesting. This topic came up because Nick and I were just having a conversation, and the more he kept riffing on this topic, the more I thought, everybody needs to hear this. We need to be having this discussion in public. And it's an interesting problem that is being faced, especially in the current crisis situations. People look to you as a scientist and like, surely you have the answers. And you want to have the answers. But often what you have to offer isn't, 2 + 2 = 4, a hard fact. It's an educated opinion and, a scientific opinion, but it's still an opinion, and it's still a work in progress. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how that may put you under a certain kind of pressure, how you can get out from under that pressure, how you can make sure that you're putting out the best science out into the world without steering people wrong, and how you can keep people open to hearing the evolution of knowledge as it comes along. Because as we've seen during this COVID thing, there's so much that is we're learning day after day. So every day we have to look at it and say, hey, do we still believe the same things we believed yesterday? Because sometimes the answer is no. And you want to get that clear. And it's really easy for people to say, well, first you said this and then you said that, and you're just flip-flopping all over the place, and how can we trust you? Well, I want to dig into how to make sure that you can be trustworthy and people will perceive you as trustworthy, even though you are sometimes changing your position on things because the facts require it. So first I'd like to ask a specific question of you, Nick. How would you differentiate between science and scientific opinion?
Okay, so the way that I see it, and again, this is just an epiphany of mine. It kind of so it may or may not apply to people. It depends on how you see things. For me, I see that this kind of relates to the question that we talked about in, I think it was the last episode, where we were talking about asking questions rather than going for results. So the natural human tendency is to go for solid facts, look for solid ground. So as a scientist, it's really easy to get pathed into going after results and instead of just doing your job, which is asking questions. And it's the same here. We're looking for solidity, if that's a word, where it doesn't exist. So what science is if you go right back to the beginning, you've got a world, a universe in front of you, and it's about exploring that universe, that world, by asking questions. And then when you get an answer to a question, it doesn't tell you the answer. What it does is shows you where the next question is. And as soon as you assume that as soon as you think you know what the first question, the first answer gives you, as soon as you think that is then the truth, then you may as well either stop doing more science, or at the very least you kind of you start pathing yourself into expecting an answer, and then we're back to expecting a result and looking for results. And so this whole thing about being a scientist, your job is to ask questions. It also means that being a scientist, you accept the fact that where we are now is not the absolute truth. It's always, the science is an evolution, as you mentioned earlier, Ken. It just keeps trucking along. There are lots of scientists in any given field who are coming up with different answers to different questions they've asked. And the truth is a kind of nebulous thing, not nebulous kind of frontier that just moves forward all the time, question after question after question after question. And that's the way that I would see it. Rather than answer after answer after answer, that's not giving you the solidity you want, because any of those answers could actually be wrong. And you have to be open to asking another question to verify that answer. And you also have to be open to the fact that it might not be correct, and then you might have to change course or change your opinion. And so when someone talks about someone talks about scientific opinion, that is at a point in time, a scientist with a specific perspective. That is that they have expertise in a given area. They've read these papers. They have these XYZ personal biases and so on. And this is their opinion on what the answer to the next question will be. And that is a useful thing to know, because they're the ones that are most likely to be able to look over the edge and say, well, it's most likely to be that, but it doesn't mean it's the truth. It means it's an opinion,
right,
a perspective-based opinion. And that's why when you look at scientific opinion, there is, no matter what the topic, there is always a spectrum. And each part of that spectrum of opinion is important, because they all represent the possible next generation of the evolution. And there are lots of examples of where science has been pathed and then realized we've gone down the wrong path, and it can be because people have been stuck on that, that they thought they were standing in truth when they weren't. Then it's a painful scenario and expensive sometimes to go in the other direction.
So you bring up something interesting. There are times when you can state with certainty that something is true, and then there are other times where you can't say it with certainty, but you can say it with probability. And then there are the times when we don't know, but my educated guess is this. So how do we differentiate then? How do we make sure we're getting clear to people that, look, I'm saying 2 + 2 = 4. That's not going to change. That's how it is. I'm saying this is what I know because this is an area of expertise for me, and this is what I know. Or I'm saying based on what's happened so far, what I think is going to happen next is this, but we still have to find out. And how do we go about getting that across in that way, making sure we're understood is the question. And I can put that to you, Nick. I don't know if it's a fair thing to ask you, but if you have an answer, I'm willing to hear it.
Yeah, okay. I'll try my best. It's not an easy question to answer, but I would just say, in terms of the general sort of stuff we're talking about here in this podcast, is how can you sit in peace as a scientist? How can you operate from a pristine position so that you're not being dragged down the pathways that human nature tends to want to drag a scientist? And so the question here then is, when you are asked for a scientific opinion, or even when you listen to a scientific opinion, where I think it's what you framed out there was really good there, that there are different levels of opinion. Some things are just hard fact, 2 + 2 = 4, but I would argue that no matter how unlikely you think it is that 2 plus 2 won't equal 4, you've got to maintain a small degree of doubt that that is the truth. Right, regardless
Okay.
of how much of as a scientist, you've just always got to have that little bit of flexibility to be, and that's an extreme, obviously, but there are things that will feel to you like it's 2 plus 2 equals 4, when it isn't. That's just ended up being an illusion, and unless you're flexible, then it won't be, you won't be able to. It'll be more difficult for you to see it. Right through to this is my opinion, and my considered opinion, and it's not necessarily truth. It's just one of the possible interpretations. And I think that all of those are absolutely valid. Of course they are, and they all have. Giving your opinion is an important thing. That could be a relative asking you something, and you have, as someone with a scientific training, you have a different level of perspective that they don't have, and so your perspective counts, even though it's not necessarily true. It's still just a perspective, and I think that the key is having some humility and some kind of self-discipline in keeping yourself aware that you don't know. Well, not that you don't know, that what you're saying might not be true, and try and get a gauge. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't actually matter how, or does it? Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Well, I will take that question on there for you. This becomes a matter of communication and making sure that you're understood. And we'll definitely be talking about communication in other episodes, but just a quick little thing to add into this, you got to differentiate between what I said and what they heard, and then what they understood. You have a thought in mind, and then you say something, and then they hear something, and then they translate that in their head, based on whatever else they know, and they get somewhere. And you, as the communicator, have to take responsibility for that final step, which is tough because it's 2 steps away from you. It wasn't even. It's not just what they heard, because you can say, "Well, I said it right." Yes, but you can tell when somebody is not receiving what you're saying, and you got to keep making the effort to make it known. And you commented on something earlier too, and this is just a way that we communicate the things that are not certain, that are our opinion, or are have a certain amount of probability. We have to speak in such a way where we're saying, well, in my opinion, or it seems to me, or it seems likely that. We've gotta couch it in some way that somebody can realize how hard does this fact look, and to the scientist. Are they saying this is absolutely certain, or are they saying this is a probability? Are they saying it's only a possibility? What are they saying? And we got to take responsibility for them hearing it properly.
And yeah, I think, Ken, that if you take it right back to to basic principles, and actually what this podcast is about, which is being a happier and more relaxed, more productive scientist, I think it's worth noting that one of the things that, looking at the difference between scientific opinion and what science actually says, is that it's quite freeing for you as a scientist. I think as a scientist, we're under pressure in some ways, either from ourselves or from people around us, or whatever it is. But we're under pressure to know what the facts are. I've certainly felt that. I'm under pressure to know what the truth is, and I can never have that. All I can have is my scientific opinion, my own scientific opinion, based on what I've read, what I've looked up, what my expertise is, what my personal biases are, what my personal blind spots are. That's going to be the same for all of us. And so it's a bit like that question of stepping back from getting results and just asking questions. The idea that you can step back and say, okay, what I'm saying is not necessarily fact. It's my best guess. It's better than a guess. It's my best opinion based on what I know and what I feel here. So
Right.
and
I'm reminded of something that Dr. Anthony Fauci said somewhere a couple of months ago, where he said, "I'm an epidemiologist. I'm not a politician. I'm not saying what's the right thing to do from a governmental standpoint. I'm saying, as an epidemiologist, this is my opinion." And at that level, obviously, we expect the highest level of data out of somebody at that pinnacle, and yet he was saying, I can't give you the final answer because that's not even my job. So it's important that we recognize that when we're talking too, that what we're saying about something is, we're offering a perspective.
Yeah. And the important thing, again, from the context of this podcast, is that what this is all about is allowing you to sit back and take the pressure off yourself, the
Right.
negative pressure, the unhelpful pressure off you, that, you need some pressure. Take the unhelpful pressure off yourself and just be a scientist. What does that mean? As a scientist, you're a person who asks questions and when required gives their opinion based on what they know. It's not a question whose job, that's completely different from someone whose job is to get results and should know the truth. As in,
Right.
if you say something and it's wrong, then that's, a really bad thing. It's not. In fact, what would be the worst position to take would be to someone where if you believe what you said was correct, and to such an extent that you were inflexible when you were presented with other data that suggested that your answer was incorrect and there was another truth.
So there's a couple of scenarios I can imagine that a scientist might find themselves in that would give them either the opportunity for satisfaction or stress. And listen to these scenarios, and then we'll talk about them individually. But anybody who's listening, you can figure out which of these are you, and they may all apply to you at certain times. So, for instance, one scenario would be, I really know what I'm talking about, and I'm hearing a lot of wrong information out there in the world, and I want to fix that. I want to help. Another scenario is people are scrambling, and they come to me begging for answers that I only have fuzzy answers to. I mean, I know better than them perhaps, but I can't say definitively that, it's black and white, and I'm not sure what to do with that, and I don't want to steer people wrong. Or I don't want to be held accountable for offering an opinion that is changeable, and then it becomes time to change it, and now nobody will let me change my opinion. It's like there's something wrong with me. I'm a flip-flopper because I changed my position, and I don't want to be in that position. So I don't even want to talk about this stuff now. Or here's another scenario. I'm a scientist, so people think they hear that word generically, and they think I'm an expert on everything when I'm only an expert on this stuff over here, and yet they expect me to be an expert on that stuff over there. Okay, so let's look at those scenarios. What do you do in a situation where you really feel like there's wrong information out there and you want to correct the record? How do you approach that?
I think that you really need to stand up. You need to that is your position for advocacy. If you this stuff about COVID has been such a case study in this for me. The stuff that came out about that it's 5G and stuff like it's come. That's
Yes.
okay. As I said, the rule of thumb, you must maintain some doubt. You've got to, even as if it's 0.000.1% of doubt, just enough there so that if something else came in, then you could some other evidence came in, then you could assimilate that. But I think we can be fairly certain that it was nothing to do with 5G masts. And
Yes.
and so in that case, that's just a really obvious example where you say, well, this is just completely incorrect, and here's why. And you can stand up. But again, you can. I mean, how would you couch that? You have to say. You still have to say, this is in my considered opinion as a scientist. This is what it looks like. This is complete nonsense. And
Right.
yeah. So and in that case, it's really important to stand up, because a basic knowledge about how diseases are spread and how viruses work and Even if you don't, I've got no clue how a 5G mask works really. So, but I'm pretty sure it has nothing to do with the ability to transmit viruses.
Sure. And, you know, obviously, we're not going to take any political positions on anything here. That's not the purpose of this. In fact, we want you to be free to be on opposite sides of this. You know, if you have that, if you've got a basis for what you think is accurate, by all means, speak it so that people can hear it.
So if I'm going to talk about that, I say, in my opinion, there's very, very low likelihood that is true. The 5G thing is true, but as a scientist, I must remain open to the possibility, even though it's not one that I would place high on the priority list for investigation. But I think it's just worth putting a little caveat, or it's not a caveat, but a little aside here, is that even me talking about this kind of idea of the difference between scientific opinion and science, I think some people think they're the same thing. I'm just offering a perspective, my perspective, that they're different, and how that can be a more freeing thing for people. And it might be an important distinction. You're completely free to disagree with me, and that's just the way it is. And until I got comfortable with the fact that it's okay for me to give an opinion, my best, most informed opinion, and it's okay for that to possibly be incorrect, and I would never have talked about something like this, because it can ruffle people's feathers, but I'm free. I'm more than happy for people to disagree with me and give me a different opinion.
Right. So let me address that part about feather ruffling, because for some of you're disturbed that there's inaccurate information out there, so it's bothering you. So one solution is for you to have a voice and correct the record to the extent that you can. But that can lead to a different kind of stress, because now you can get into conflict with people. And if you're spending all your time on Facebook having flame wars with somebody that is absolutely certain that little green men are controlling us, that you can waste a lot of energy and a lot of effort on that, and it doesn't give you that freedom that having a voice has. All it does is drag you down into a morass. So you really have to pay attention to what's happening in any given moment. If you're communicating, if it feels good, if it feels freeing, by all means continue it. If it feels like it's starting to hurt you, then you got to take a step back and say, okay, do I really need to be doing this? Now, obviously, there are going to be settings where you're required to. You've done your experiments and you're required to do a presentation, and it's not going to be fun because you got results that people weren't expecting, and now you're getting pushback. Well, that may be part of the job. That's a little different story. But there, hopefully, you've got an environment of people that are also scientifically minded and will hear, like, well, here are the results we got. Here are the conclusions that we're drawing and why we're drawing those conclusions. If you are pristine about your science, and then about your communication about your science, you're going to find you'll have less pressure. And sometimes we get frustrated, like, people, why can't they just see it? Here's the data, look at it, it's so obvious. Well, you got to remember that everybody isn't as smart as you. And I know this can sound arrogant, but it isn't about being arrogant. You can be humble and recognize that you have innate abilities that perhaps most people don't. And you got to get the piece of that. You got to be okay with that. I'm often the smartest person in the room, if that's the case for you. If that's the case for you, don't be proud about that. Realize, well, then I got to be helpful. I can't expect everybody to rise to my level. I have to help them along. So, it's like, if you're a third grade teacher, you're the smartest person in the room. You got a bunch of 8-year-olds there. You're going to know more than them. There's no question about it. Well, are you going to expect them to be you? That would be unfair. That wouldn't get you anywhere. And that would create stress for you. Whereas if you can say, look, they are where they are. Well, how can I present this so that they can grasp it? And sometimes it's you have that problem because you're presenting to people who just don't have expertise. They're not stupid. They're not inexperienced. They just don't have the expertise. Other times you're dealing with people that they really don't have the IQ, and so you got to present it differently. So take a look at your audience, and then there are some audiences you just shouldn't engage with, because if all it's going to do is turn into arguments, who has time for that? We have lives to live, so don't find yourself sucked down into that kind of problem. So let's look at a next scenario. You're being called on. You didn't ask to be called on, but you're being called on. So all of a sudden you're there, and somebody says, "Hey, Sally's a scientist. What do you think?" And you're, now what? What do you do with that, Nick?
Well, then that's where you've got to absolutely qualify what you're saying by according to what are you? You're a biologist, and they're asking you about astrophysics or something, or
Mm-hmm.
or like I used to. My sister used to have a boyfriend who, when I was doing my PhD on slime molds, would hang on to my every word about medical conditions that he thought you might have, and it was just quite crazy. And yeah, you've got to say it. You've got to, and it's really I at that time I got quite I probably thought I knew more than I did, and I would say, yeah, well, this is how this works, and this and probably I overstepped my or I how would I say it? I probably knew more about these things than he did, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't define the fact that that I this is what I know. This is this is not my area of expertise. This is just my opinion based on what I know. You should talk to someone else who is more qualified than I am if you're really worried about this thing, and and so on, so that it's actually I've actually positioned the advice or the knowledge that I've given.
Yeah, you just said something really important there. Just because somebody puts you on the hook doesn't mean you have to stay there. You can let yourself off the hook, and you do it with humility. Going, I'm actually not an expert on that. So you can take the charge out of the room, without having to. Well, now I have to opine about something that I'm a little fuzzy on. So there's another interesting thing, and I have a different perspective because I'm not a scientist. I am a computer scientist, and and it causes the same problems for me in different areas that happens to you folks. So, for instance, I stepped out of university in 1979. There was a Burroughs 9000 mainframe there. That was the only computer I had ever touched, other than a little Hewlett Packard thing that had a one-line screen. um, the world's changed a bit since then, but people still come to me like, "Hey, do you know how to fix my computer?" It's like, well, no, I'm not a hardware engineer. I did software. Oh, do you know Windows? Well, actually, no, I don't actually know Windows. I work on Macs. And, there's this whole realm of stuff. Yeah, I probably know more than you do, but I don't know it inside and out, and I don't claim to. So, I'm not going to be putting in your new hard drive for you, and I'm not going to be trying to configure your Windows, because that's not something I know how to do, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know that, and not just because I don't want to be fixing your stuff, but if I know, I'm happy to help. But you can look at it the same way. In your realm, you know what you know, and you know what you don't know. So feel free about that. There's an adage out there where you say the older I get, the more I realize how little I know, and I think that sounds interesting. It's true and it's funny, but I think a more accurate way to put it is that the older I get, the more knowledge I realize is available. So and as a scientist, that's your job, is to uncover that stuff. And the more you realize there's more out there, the better it is. So you're not looking stupid when you say something like that. You're not even looking ignorant. You're looking wise to say, I don't know.
Yeah, and that can be difficult in a situation. Again, this the COVID scenario has been really instructive or really illuminating in how all this works. And when you've seen scientists under pressure to provide answers, and they give the best answers that they have available, but it's completely not qualified, mostly because you're hearing it through the media, but also because a lot of the, in the clamor for some for results, and or for the clamor for information about the virus and so on, a lot of the kind of the traditional processes broke down. Peer review, well, didn't break down. They were just they didn't have time to enact them. So we were working. People were, newspapers are reporting on preprints that haven't been peer reviewed, and a person's opinion on the situation was reported as fact, and that was like it was almost like a caricature of science. What happened there in the leading edge of what was being communicated to the public was really so unrefined science, and it was being presented as scientific fact,
Right.
and political and heavily politicized as well, of course.
So this brings up that next scenario of what do you do when the time has come for you to change your position? You said this, but now new data has come in and you realize, nope, we got to actually do the opposite of that, or think the opposite of that. How do you deal with that situation?
So I mean, again, this podcast is all about creating peace for yourself as a scientist, right? So that you sidestepping a lot of these pressures, so that you just do your job and you enjoy it and you do it to the best of your abilities. And so, as a scientist, from my training, or how I interpreted my training as a scientist and my early experience as a scientist, if I got it wrong, that's a bad thing, and I did something wrong, and I should feel bad about it, and maybe even try and disprove or deflect or do something about that. But actually, if you are sitting properly in the position of a scientist, that all you're doing is you're presenting your best opinion based on the facts. Your job is to ask the question and see what the answer is. Then you can, if somebody else asks the question and the answer is different than to what you expected or what you said or predicted, it's absolutely fine. It's all part of the job. And there's a distinction between that and not knowing. Not knowing. How would you say this? There's a fine line distinction between creating an opinion based on the best available facts and your knowledge of the area and so on, and that being, it's okay for that to be incorrect, and there's a fine line between that and not doing enough homework, so not informing yourself enough. So the classic would be you're defending your thesis, and you set forward an idea, but you didn't do enough. You missed a set of papers that were really important, and so you didn't arm yourself with the knowledge. But and classically, that's a really bad thing, because, well, you didn't do enough reading and so on. And in a way it is, but in a way that's just the learning process as well.
Sure.
Nobody says you've got to be perfect. Well, maybe your thesis committee says you do, but but in real life, as a scientist, you're not perfect. Your job is to give it your best and not stress about, man, maybe I haven't read every single paper that's available. It's just it's to be committed for the right reason, and not for the stressful reason of, I don't want to ever be proven wrong.
And chances are, most of the time, if you're changing your position, it isn't because you did something wrong the first time. It's not that I completely messed up the experiment and got bad data and that's what I reported. No, that's probably not what happened. You had limited data, you reported that, and now you have more data, and it requires a change in position, so you change. Now, in those rare moments where it's not imperfect to have limited data. It is imperfect if you have bad data that's your fault. It's bad data because I did it poorly. But, honestly, that doesn't happen that often. You don't usually have that scenario. Your scenario is much more likely that I have limited data. It's good data, but it's limited. Well, okay. hone your craft, become good at what you do. That's part of it. That's one of the things. If you want to be happy as a scientist, get good at it. If you're bad at it, you're going to be unhappy.
See, this is another thing where I've experienced situations where I've had bad data because I wasn't doing it correctly. And again, it's just one of those situations that the and again, depending on your your outlook on life and who's around you and so on, that can be a reason to just be down on yourself about, I'm not doing this experiment properly, I can't get this thing to work. It's that's but I think that the peaceful position is to go back to, well, this is the part of my job. Part of my job is to learn this technique so that I can ask the questions properly, to make sure that I am including all of the scientifically relevant safety nets that make sure that if I get data from this technique, then I know whether it's good or bad. I'm doing the controls, it's reproducible, the experiment's designed properly. You can go back to those fundamentals with just care, taking care and taking responsibility for the work you're doing. And you can also get help with setting, find with a mentor to help to set those things up correctly. And then when you're executing the experiments, you make sure you listen to what that experiment is saying to you, and don't just, oh well, that band appeared, so yes, okay, that's the answer I was looking for, let's move on. You make sure that it is absolutely pristine, and then so you accept that. Again, that's another part of moving away from the pressure from results, another benefit of moving away from the pressure for results. And it's not that you don't need results, it's that if you are, it's a change in focus, a shift on focus from, I need to get this band on a gel because that's what I need for my results section, to my job is to do this experiment with as much care, attention, and commitment as possible, and to really listen to what it tells me, and then move forward when I am convinced that correctly set up experiment is telling it's telling me something. When I'm confident what it's telling me, then I will move forward. And if it turns out that was wrong, then I can take a step back and examine why it was wrong. But at the time of accepting the result of that experiment, to the best of my scientific ability, did I think that this was the correct answer? Yes. So that's fine. That as a scientist, you've done your job. That's completely different from chasing the result and bashing through an experiment, skimping on the controls, skimping on the design, getting what you think was the right band, zooming in on it, saying that's cool, we'll take that on to the next experiment, which sounds like terrible, but I've seen a lot of scientists who do that, or who've done that in my circles previously. So and it's a stressful life, and it's not really science.
Right. Well, young Padawans, the master is speaking. Listen. And for specifics on this kind of thing, the specific mentoring about technique and about process, and then about how to assess results. There's a lot of things on Bitesize Bio that'll content that's there that's explicitly about what it is you're doing in any given area. There's so much information there, and that if you don't have a living, breathing mentor in front of you, you have a resource like Bitesize Bio that can help you with that. And so, by all means, do that.
So I would qualify that this before people go up and look up my publication record and so on. I don't claim to have been a master in the lab, but what I have had is I've had a lot of varying experience in the lab, and then in doing Bitesize Bio, a kind of unique position to reflect a lot on what went right for me in the lab, what went wrong, and why that happened, and what was happening for other people and why that happened. And so that's where I'm coming from here. It's kind of that, if you can't do, teach.
And that's why there's hundreds of writers on Bitesize Bio, because they all have different areas of expertise. But these are, for the most part, PhD scientists who are speaking about what they know from experience in the lab. So even if Nick isn't an expert on a particular topic, he's found somebody that is, and has them presenting for you. So it really, the idea of becoming a master is really is a great one. There's a great deal of satisfaction in gaining mastery in any area, and whether it's in your science at work, or whether it's being a snowboarder, or painting watercolors, or whatever it is you want to do with yourself. You have this literally this great laboratory of yourself in a place to get mastery in your work, but you can play that out in your whole life. And whether you become a master there, you can also become a master in the kitchen. You can also become a master with your kids. You can also become a master in your neighborhood, in your community. Once you grasp that, it's applicable across your whole life. So that's what we're standing for here today. So I feel like we could go on and talk about this for another hour, but we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that there's a, you're talking about mastery, and really this is what we're talking about. It's kind of peaceful mastery of the position of being a scientist, and how do you do that? And I just think that the last, you've got lots of ways of looking at things, Ken. The last two have been something more about what I've, a view that I would take towards that central goal of becoming more peaceful, becoming more effective as a scientist. And it's interesting that both of those are about stepping back from what you're in. For me, anyway, it's about stepping back from the initial perception of what it meant to be a scientist, and stepping back into something more peaceful that's a little bit against the flow. Again, going from looking for results to asking questions, going from feeling the pressure to stand in knowledge, back to the position of all I can give is my perspective and make sure that my perspective is as good as possible. And both of those things, to me, are straight away more peaceful and free up from a lot of the garbage that surrounds chasing results and having to be right all the time.
Love it. Well, I'd say that's a wrap for this topic. So, Nick, I know you have the wrap-up speech, so go for it.
Well, so I would just say that thanks again for listening. I hope that was useful. I feel like that was a bit more riffing from me than it is normally. So let's see how that feels. If you've enjoyed that, again, as I said at the beginning, please go back to episodes 1 to 9 of the podcast, where Ken really lays down some great stuff that has helped me in progressing to working more effectively and understanding things more, which is these foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors. Again, you get those in episodes 1 to 9 of this podcast. Other things you can do to follow us or to interact more with us is to go to facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Club. If you join up there, we will have some different ways of looking at all of this stuff and different ways to different discussions and so on that will help you dive deeper into this if you think it's something that's worth pursuing. So again, thank you from me for you guys listening. And Ken, thanks again for another great episode.
Thank you. We'll see you all next time.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.